Because the other part of this, Melissa, is that we found that we can work in a virtual environment and companies want great people. And it's the companies that are going to say, I don't care where you're at. I just want the best talent or the right fit for our company that are going to get the best talent because people are redesigning their relationship with work.
Welcome to the Smart Talk series, the show for professionals who want strategies, tips, and real talk about all things PR, marketing, and social media. Your host is Melissa Vella-Williamson, an award-winning, accredited, and nationally recognized PR pro and communication thought leader. And now your host, Melissa Vella-Williamson.
Hello and welcome to the Smart Talk series. I'm Melissa Vella-Williamson. This season, our goal is to pass the mic. Today, I'm joined by Mark Mohammadpour. Mark is the owner and chief well-being officer at Chasing the Sun. After spending his public relations career as an executive at Edelman and Weber Shandwick, and after losing and keeping off 150 pounds over the last decade, Mark founded Chasing the Sun to empower businesses and their employees to prioritize their well-being so that they can shine in the family room and the boardroom. Chasing the Sun's team and enterprise-wide well-being programs deliver relatable, practical, and actionable solutions. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Melissa.
So tell us, that was a little bit about your background, but tell us more about you and your work today.
It's been an honor over the last few years, Melissa, working with companies who realize that if they spend money taking care of their employees, they're going to make money back. But more importantly, it's the right thing to do. What happened before the pandemic, Melissa, is when we think about employee wellness, we typically thought about it in terms of yoga sessions and gym memberships and having smoothies at work and those types of things that are really thinking about in terms of physical health primarily. And if anything we saw during the pandemic is that people have shown to be much more vulnerable, not only in their physical work environments that they're in, being at home, but also just recognizing that we've been dealing with a lot. And companies who recognize that and think about the broader well-being of their employee and are being proactive in providing services and tools based on feedback that they received from their employees is going to benefit the employee in so many ways. It means it's going to keep them at the company. It's going to improve retention. It's going to improve productivity, which is ultimately going to make the company more money. And as Chasing the Sun has evolved, it's become clear that there's an opportunity to work with the C-suite and business owners on designing and executing a strategic employee well-being program to take all that in mind. And after working in PR for the last 20 years, like I'm sure you have experienced, we've written a lot of strategic plans.
Yeah.
And thinking about things like goals and measurable objectives and strategies and tactics, and being able to apply that approach to employee well-being has become a natural evolution of my career. And so I'm proud to be able to take the tenets that I learned in the public relations career and apply it in a way that is providing benefit to people within companies. And that's where we're at today.
I really appreciate the holistic approach that you all are using to marry the physical needs that we have as well as our mental needs. And, our brain is our most important muscle or organ. Which is it, Mark? Is it muscle or organ? I feel like it's both.
Whatever you say.
But our brain's super important, right? We can agree on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And having real control of it, particularly these last few years where if you are a communications pro or leader, or particularly a PR pro, that you were the guide and you were the counselor, like you really had to have discipline around controlling your emotions and really your brain and like how you felt and process things. So I think that it sounds very smart that you all evolved to really put focus on that. And physically, I really saw the last few years, a lot more of my friends, families, and peers just come down with health challenges. I know you and I are both columnists with the Public Relations Society of America. And one of my columns was the new trends I saw, which were these unintended health challenges. And for some people, true crises that came out of maybe years of chronic stress. There's a lot more pros. My dentist tells me hey, you're kind of grinding your teeth. I said, what? I don't grind my teeth. And he says, well, that's not what I see. Right. And it started during the pandemic. And I think just tension maybe that I had during the day that I worked through came out at night. And he told me he saw a huge uptick in people grinding. So I wonder, have you noticed anything like that?
When we think about well-being, how this has evolved, and even the Surgeon General has come out with guidance on as we think about the well-being of people, it's beyond the physical, it's beyond the mental, it's thinking about the career, it's thinking about financial well-being, which is obviously significant impact on stress and anxiety. It's about our community and how we feel when we go and volunteer, because when we go and volunteer and we give our time, we can increase our empathy, which is incredibly important for our mental health. And so there's a lot of connective tissue. And I think this is where we've evolved from quote unquote wellness to overall holistic well-being. And the opportunity for companies to have now is that there are a lot of companies that offer a lot of these benefits as it relates to physical health, mental health, financial health, community. But there's an opportunity, Melissa, and again, this comes back to where the PR communication skills come into play, is communicating those existing benefits to their employees and thinking about it in terms of the broader well-being of the employee and how that impacts the employer. And then on top of that, it's another thing that I chat a lot about, is how do we empower those people managers who are the first group of people that employees are going to be engaging with. They're the people that they trust the most, that they chat with the most, that are thinking about their career, thinking about their lives. And how do we make sure that they're aware of the benefits of the company and thinking about how that connects to the well-being of their employee? Let's take paid time off, for instance. There are a lot of companies now that are exploring new ways to look at paid time off. And as Americans, Melissa, we do not take our time off. The U.S. Travel Association says that we leave hundreds of millions of days on the table every year. And a lot of that comes down to societal issues and optics. And a lot of it comes down to just general awareness of what we have to take off. And what we're seeing now is companies taking a more kind of quote unquote unlimited PTO approach, which on the face of it has benefits, but the reality is that if you don't put a structure behind it, people aren't going to take as much paid time off and they're going to burn out.
Yeah.
That is a management leadership discussion that has to be partnered with HR to be able to have a dialogue with their employees and empower them to operationalize taking time off. That's just one of a myriad of examples as we think about well-being and how much this has evolved over the last few years.
I agree with you. I have my own business and even I struggle to feel like I have the right to take time off. And I don't,
by the way.
I know I'm working on it, Mark, but it's like, of course I do. And I'm gentler and kinder to those that, work under me, right? Or with me. And I think about where did that come from? And I can remember some scenarios and environments that maybe that messaging was taught to me or felt to me, but we'll dig into hustle and grind culture a little bit later, but some of it comes from that too, what we read and see about what an entrepreneur is, right? What a leader is. And so I think what you're doing is really important. And I will also say it's really interesting that you brought up the benefits. I, for a stint, worked in promoting benefits communication. So I worked really hard to make some of the more almost academic feeling language around what the benefits were and how to access them, especially around like employee assistance programs. I mean, there was cool benefits in a corporation I worked in, like they would help you research venues for a birthday party for your kid. And I actually used it and tried it, and it saved me so much time and energy. And I was like, I love that, right? Which decreased stress. But as I would try to promote it, it was still that sense of a little bit of shame, a little bit of I don't need help, a little bit of not wanting to access some of the benefits because missing time from work, if there was a health visit. So it seems like a really complex dynamic that people like you and PR folks and anyone who does those type of communication, we can really have and shape that in a more positive direction going forward.
You're absolutely right. And you spoke about your role in benefit communications and Melissa, as we think about our profession and the opportunities we have going forward, there will always be earned media opportunities. That is at the very face of what we do in public relations and earned media. But we've seen over the decades that evolving, newsrooms shrinking. But I like to think about it in terms of how are we connecting with our publics in a way that is strategic and realistic with the nature of how we obtain information. And one of the things I've been trying to push, and I know a lot of other people have been trying to push in our industry, is we have so many incredible skill sets, Melissa, baked into what we do in public relations that from an internal communication standpoint, from an employee communication standpoint, there's a lot that we can do to help shape the ultimate goal that organizations have to be able to get their employees to take advantage of these benefits. And your example that you just shared about the birthday party is great. So an opportunity for companies is to really do some story mining with their employees and be able to talk about benefits and how they've been used to be able to kind of overcome that stigma and say, this is a part of our compensation package. I think that's the other part of this, Melissa, is the role the communicator can play. This is not to replace anything that HR is doing, but it's more of a complement, is how do we talk about total compensation? You get a salary, and of course, that's what we most focus on. Like, that's straight cash. But then there's the 401k benefits, there's all the other medical benefits and everything. And how does that tie into the overall total compensation and benefit for the employee? And that's an opportunity for us as strategic communicators, Melissa, to be able to put that hat on and be able to say, look, we're trying to reach a public, our employees. We have all this information. How do we strategically communicate that? And that's everything from how do we visually do it to the time of day, the day of the week, the frequency, the channel. I mean, these are all things that we think about in terms of earned media as far as external comms. And the opportunity for us to apply that internally, it is going to be a big boon for this industry in the coming years. And I look forward to seeing how it goes. And again, it all comes back to well-being. And why are we doing this in the first place? Well, it's to get people to use more benefits, which could potentially reduce health insurance costs, which makes it easier for companies, and it impacts the bottom line. So that's a lot of connective tissue there.
So much. And I really found that my experience having done the external communication really helped me when I did internal benefits comm and employee programs, because I would look for the story, right? Tell the story about how I used it to set up my daughter's 5-year-old birthday party, and you can use it to set that up for your kid's graduation. Mm-hmm. And so I think humanizing it's really important, and normalizing these conversations and use of that proactive approach is really important. I think PR people can lend that. So if you ever do get a little burnt out with the external comms, consider internal comms, and HR communication or benefits communications are the keywords there when you search those kind of jobs, and you can do so much good there, like Mark's saying. So Mark, you were featured as one of my pass the mic voices in my book, Smart Talk, at the end of chapter 9, which I titled Think Like a Pro. And so I really chose you because I love what you're doing in your space. How do you feel that mindset impacts how we approach our well-being?
One of the first things that I changed in my well-being, so you mentioned this in the intro, the genesis of this came in 2007. So more than 15 years ago, I was 350 pounds and I was growing in my career, but my waist was growing. And on the scale, it was bad enough, Melissa, but I had sleep apnea. I was breaking chairs in restaurants, trying to fly on a coach seat for a press tour from Portland, Oregon, where I lived, to New York or Chicago. I mean, it was miserable. And I was just scared for my life. And I knew I needed to make a change. And that happened in December 2007 when I proposed to my now wife, Christine, and she said yes. And I realized that I'm not just living for myself, I'm living for her and her family and everyone. And I needed to take a different tact as it relates to how am I going to lose weight? And I started with breakfast, and I was used to eating scones and mochas and having 1,000 calories in my stomach by 8 a.m. And I said, what if I just made a couple changes here? What if I switched to green tea? And what if I switched to spinach feta wrap, cut my caloric intake by 70% by breakfast? And then I started to apply similar techniques for, lunch and dinner, and stop eating so late and exercise. It was just a lot of trial and error, but the common denominator was what was in my control. And as it relates to PR communications, folks, when we think about what's in our control, it's around the tactic. When we write the press release, when we write the tweet, when we write the newsletter, the corporate video, those are the things that are ultimately within our control. Whether the media picks it up, how many reshares, retweets, or reshares of our LinkedIn posts or views of the video, that's not at all within our control. So that's the mindset shift that I've made and that I implore people who are thinking about their well-being to do is think less about quantifying the change at a broader kind of objective level, measurable objectives level, and more at the what's in your control at the tactical level. And those are discussions that I host as part of one of my core workshops around designing your own well-being accountability story.
I think mindset is so much like if you can start with, there are things that I can control. Because I think a lot of times when life's busy and crazy and noisy, it feels out of control. And then sometimes you feel out of control. And I think I shared this with you when I first met you, Mark, but some of my listeners may not know or realize it because I don't share a lot of photos about it. But growing up, I quickly became an obese child. And that led to me being an obese teenager and an obese young adult. So I remember crossing some invisible line about third grade where I was, all of a sudden I was overweight. And I went from kind of what was normal in my little classroom society to, being fat. And, really grew up most of my childhood years being really picked on for that. But that grew other parts of me that really started valuing people for who they were and character and being more merit driven versus, surface driven as an individual. So I do look back on that and say that adversity really did help shape me as a person. But as I got into my freshman year of college, I realized, I got looked over for a promotion. I kind of talk about this in my book when I'm talking about strategic planning, actually, just like you mentioned, is I put together a plan once I had the capacity as an adult to figure out how to lose weight and control what I ate. But like you're saying, that really made me feel like, I'm 19 years old. I'm being passed over for a job, even though I'm teaching everyone how to do it at the theme park I was at the time. And I'm trying to present to the class and no one's really listening to me. I had situations like you where I'm like, I can't really fit in the roller coaster seat. And I was always scared the belt wouldn't click, right? Mm-hmm. It's a horrible feeling as a kid to be around your friends like that. And I just had that moment where I realized my life's not going to be what I want it to be if I continue this place. And I was uncomfortable. And, I didn't even think about health then. I was 19, right? Yep. So I went through my weight loss journey like you and made these changes, but it really was that shift of I'm in control. I'm not a victim. This isn't a chronic illness someone gave me. As a kid, I think I thought some of it was genetic. Well, some of it I'm sure is genetics, but some of it was learned behavior. So I think that's really important. And while I don't really publicize that part of my life too much, because I honor that I was a child. So even when I see a photo like that, I feel pain because I'm like, I was a child. I didn't quite do that to myself in a way that a child's not responsible for some things. But I think it's really important, this mission and like you, I'm sure the rest of your life's been about keeping this weight off, especially in these really demanding careers.
Absolutely.
So you are now like an expert in creating these wellness programs for busy PR and communication pros. You're talking to all kinds of folks around the country. What seems to be really helping people in our pretty crazy profession?
Yeah. Well, first, Melissa, congratulations on your journey and for keeping it off. And I think, when we go through these life changes, it increases empathy and
yes,
we can learn to be more empathic. And part of that is, not only through lived experiences, but how those lived experiences impact experiences that perhaps you don't have, but because you're more empathic or empathetic, you can do what you can to be in that perspective. And I think that's really important. Mm-hmm. What's happened over the last few years, as I've shared my story, and it's obvious that not everybody has a challenge with weight or even weight loss. Some people have challenges with weight gain, but the common denominator is that everybody wants to do something for their well-being. And the message around what's in your control and auditing your standard operating procedures is really key. So one example, and to get back to your question, is around meetings. We've standardized, especially in this remote hybrid world, that we will standardize on 60-minute video calls or 30-minute video calls. And there's a lot of value in video calls, but there's data from Microsoft that shows that the more back-to-back video calls that we have, the more stress and anxiety goes up. And I think that makes a lot of sense. We're on camera. We have to be on. There's a delay in how we see our responses, and it's just exhausting. And I'm not looking at the screen. I have to look at the camera because that's how high eye contact is made. And so I challenge teams to think about how many meetings that they have, to do meeting audits, to reduce the amount of time their meetings from 60 minutes to 30 or 30 to 15, or does this need to be a meeting? Can this be an email? How do we send pre-reads in advance so that decisions are made in the room and we're not doing status meetings where everyone goes around and say, Melissa, what did you do this week? And Joe, what did you do this week? We have the technology to maximize the time together. And you're saying, what does that have to do with well-being? Well, if especially in our world, Melissa, we're in a lot of meetings. I can't ask our profession to not have any more meetings. That's not how we operate. But at the same time, if we don't have a discussion around this, it will never change. That could impact 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, 5 hours a week, 10 hours a week. It depends. And so these are the conversations I have. And what I love, Melissa, is when I'm talking to a company and having a discussion, and right in the room, that team is making a commitment saying, okay, we're not going to have meetings on Fridays, or we are going to reduce our 60-minute calls to 30, or some tangible change that shows that we care about our people and we're going to give time back to them to be able to do what they need, whether that's taking care of their family, whether that's meditation, whether it's something physical related, scheduling time with a financial planner, whatever that is, it relates to their well-being. How can we optimize our work so that we can take care of ourselves first? And that's been a wonderful part of this journey and talking to companies around relatable, practical, and actionable tips that they can implement right away.
Yes, attack the meetings.
Yes.
A couple of things came up for me there when I'm listening to you. I'm like, yes, well-being and meetings are important, because what I would often hear, and I struggled with, which was a big benefit of me going out on my own, was that I could control my meetings. I can do my deep work here because I'm not being privy to all these different company meetings and culture meetings, and not that all that's not important. But somebody told me this, and I thought it was genius, and I've used it ever since, was, there's meetings where you're just coming together to share information. And then there's work sessions where you and someone or a team can come together to actually literally side by side work on a project, and you get something done. So I'm careful about when I say, let's have a work session. That means, yeah, we may get on Zoom, but I'm not even interested in seeing you on the camera. I just want to screen share and work on this document together, knock it out. That's the 30 minutes we needed. So being more thoughtful about it, I think, is really important, because one of the things I would hear from a lot of different types of professionals of all kinds was, I'm in so many meetings every day that I don't have time to do the work that's assigned me in these meetings.
Yep. Hear it all the time. Absolutely.
So what about at the individual level? What are some of the common mistakes or pitfalls you're seeing for PR pros? And has that changed any in the last few years?
One example is kind of as it relates to meetings, and what you're saying about the verbiage, I think, is really important. As we think about stress and anxiety in our work, it comes down to communications. And one of the things that I always would see is, for instance, I might get a calendar invite that would simply say the word chat, or do you have a few minutes to chat? Like, your stress level goes through the roof because you don't know what that's about, right? Am I getting fired? Am I getting a promotion?
Right.
It's, 99% of the time it's something in between. How we communicate, especially in this virtual world, is really important. If you're going to send me a calendar invite at 4 p.m. on a Friday to chat on Monday, you better have a very explicit reason in that calendar invite, or else I'm not going to sleep at all that weekend. My stress is going through the roof. So we have to make sure that as communicators, we're being as clear as possible around meetings, around expectations, around feedback that we're giving, and trust each other as professionals that we're going to take that information and apply it and make ourselves better. I think that's one of the things over the last few years, that it's an opportunity for us to evolve, again, especially in this hybrid remote era, which leads me to the other part is companies that are struggling to figure out how are we going to get our people back in the office. And every day, Melissa, we're seeing more and more companies making quote unquote demands of people coming back to the office. And my message is, there's value in having people come into the office, but we have found over the last few years that companies can run and function with people being at home. So you have to sell it to them And I don't mean this in a slimy way. I mean this in a, what is it for the employee to come back and work in the office? There is value, but for people making demands and saying coming back to the office 2 days a week or 3 days a week, and all you're doing is you're sitting at a cubicle on Zoom calls when you could be doing that at home, is a waste of money to commute. It's a waste of time to commute, all in the idea of optics and a perceived increase in productivity. So again, back to well-being, this is about time and how we're spending our time. And the companies that are making these mandates or suggestions, but doing so in a way that shows the value to employees, are the ones that are going to keep those employees. Because the other part of this, Melissa, is that we found that we can work in a virtual environment, and companies want great people. And it's the companies that are going to say, I don't care where you're at, I just want the best talent and the right fit for our company, that are going to get the best talent, because people are redesigning their relationship with work.
Yeah, I think that's already been happening to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
And I like how you use that example about when you set a meeting, or you, even text, right? You did, like, can you call me? Like, give someone context,
Right,
so that emotionally they're not riled up. I mean, we get riled up enough during the day with different issues that we have to tackle. But to me, that directness is kindness. And there's a way that you can just tell people what you need or where you're coming from without that. And I think that's a big part of what we need to think about, is how agile are we being with our society? How agile are we being with our workers and those that work with us? Because years ago, I had to start my own business just to have more flexibility in my location. And I'm so glad that a silver lining of the pandemic was that it did force companies to try it. And of course, not every position can be remote, but for a lot of us who have to think deeply,
correct, and
need to write high stakes materials, being in a cube in a loud open environment is not the best place for that.
Yep.
And I've certainly done my best work where I could isolate myself a little bit more. And I know that I felt for journalists who told me, like, yeah, they're pulling us back in. So I think that what you're championing is important. And then individually, it's nice that more pros are feeling like they have the agency to say, I don't want to work like this anymore. I want to change how I do that. Because some pros did get healthier during the pandemic because they had more chances to walk or fit in exercise during the day or before and after work, when they didn't have that commute to worry about in the same way. So I think that's great.
Absolutely. We're redefining how we work and our relationship with work. And I think part of this also, Melissa, is I tire of the idea that people are lazy or various generations are lazy. I don't believe that. I really don't. I think part of it is that we all have reputations to uphold. And the people that don't show up and do great work, their reputation is going to be impacted. So to go in and assume that people are going to be lazy and aren't going to work from home just to kind of skate by, I would rather go the opposite, to be able to say, I'm going to trust you as a professional from the start. And it's up to you to prove me wrong. Because we all have reputations to uphold. I don't think people think about it that way, or enough people. And that's something that I'm trying to really push, is people want to do great work because it's going to positively impact their career, their finances, whatever. And when we come from a place of pressure and stress, and you have to earn your trust, and people just aren't going to have to work in that environment anymore. There's going to be other options. And that's what this era has done for our society.
Yeah, absolutely. When I taught as an adjunct for a while, I remember one technique I heard about, and where a teacher would say, okay, everyone in this class is starting with an A, and how that positive note changed the dynamic right away with students. Everyone's starting with an A, and you have to just work to keep it this semester. And so instead of starting from 0 and trying to earn 100, you start with 100 and try not to lose it. And I think that that's what it should be in terms of our working with adult professionals. Is that, if you got through the recruiting process and you were hired, you're starting with an A, and just work to keep the A.
Absolutely. Especially with all the pre-work that the prospective employees do. I mean, all the conversations and the work and the ideas and the thoughts, and that's a lot that goes into it. Obviously, you you know what you're doing. Let's start from there.
Yeah. So I'm sure you're probably not in love with this hustle and grind work culture that seems to be glorified in the US. Like I said before, it kind of runs rampant in the entrepreneur space that we just got to grind. And I know what it's like to get real darn close to burnout. I'm working all the time to try to fight away from that and not push myself too hard. But in terms of that perspective, like, how is that affecting PR leaders, PR pros?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I don't see my role in trying to cancel or remove the hustle and grind kind of culture, quote unquote. I think it is a problem, but I think the opportunity to discuss it is less of a kind of black or white, all or none, and more of, if you're a leader, you're an entrepreneur and you want to work 18 hours a day, you're an adult. I don't want to kind of impact that, especially if you have goals and you feel like your value is tied to that, go for it. The challenge where that comes in though, Melissa, is when that impacts other people. And this is where we see it in our industry.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're in-house or agency side and you're an executive and you're working on nights and weekends, are you expecting your team to do the same? If so, have you communicated that to them? Was that part of the interview process? Was that part of the onboarding process? Are you expecting that from your team? If not, great. Have you communicated that to them? I had an experience, Melissa, late in my PR career. And by that time, I set boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
After 5:00, Monday through Friday, I wouldn't be responding to email. Now I might be checking it, but unless it was urgent, it can wait till the next day. It could wait till Monday. And I had an experience where I received an email from a client after 5:00 on a Friday, and not my direct supervisor, but someone senior on the account that I was on was copied on it. And it was an email that did not need to be responded until Monday. And I responded, but the following Monday, I heard from my senior colleague and said, Mark, I expect my senior execs to check their email once a weekend. And they never communicated that to me before I joined the account. They never communicated that to me during the process. That's an unwritten rule that they had established and assumed that their team knew about. And those are one of the things that I discuss with companies about, is one of those unwritten rules. And I work with teams to create what I call a workplace charter. What are those unwritten rules around why meetings need to be scheduled? What are our work off on hours? What are our communication channels? When can we take paid time off? All these other factors that perhaps before you started your job, you weren't aware of, and you just kind of learned on the go. It was like, oh yeah, that's how so-and-so likes to run meetings, or, that's how so-and-so takes their vacation. They join calls and check emails. And that's not a good, healthy environment. I can't control what executives do. They're adults, right? But when it comes down to how that impacts their team, because people look up to them and they mimic them and they model them and adopt the expectation to be able to grow in your career, you better communicate that during the interview process before people join. And those are the things that I facilitate, because again, it all comes back to well-being. It all comes back to the time that we spend, the stress and anxiety that we have, and everything in between. It comes down to communication. And the more that we as PR communicators can install that, the better it is for all of us in our industry.
I just adore that you talk about and dig out what are those unwritten rules, because absolutely, I think some of those are what keep people up at night. I had a very similar experience at one point in my career where I was very strenuous hiring process. I knew a lot about the organization. And then when I started working inside, my leader was like, so we expect employees to work 50 hours here every week. And it threw me off because I was a salaried employee. I wasn't counting hours. I wasn't billing hours. So I didn't even quite know where that came from or how to account for that. So sometimes it is. And hopefully, of course, there's always someone who says something that it's their unwritten rule, that the way they manage their life or their mindset, and not necessarily the companies, but without having that agency, someone like me would not know to say, well, where does that come from? How do I count that? Is that something I need to be concerned about? they just take that and try to figure that out. And then they're just sitting at their desk longer for no reason. So
exactly.
it's important.
It's like, why are we doing this? Is it for power? Is it for what's the actual purpose?
Yeah.
And I think over the last few years, Melissa, we found that we have the opportunity to ask more questions, and the companies that are more proactive in saying why we're doing this, the better. This profession, Melissa, we know that it's not a 8 to 5 Monday through Friday job. It's not. There's nights, weekends, holidays. I understand that, but there's a middle ground between 24/7 and 8 to 5 that we have to have some agreement on, and we have to be and share and talk about why it's important, and really work at how we can minimize that amount of time that we're wasting when we could be spending it with our family and picking up our kids from daycare and walking our dog and going to the doctor and having a life, while still doing what we need for our business. And also, again, we're upholding our reputation.
Yeah.
This is the other thing is, as companies, they need to understand that their employees, they want to do right, but they're not going to do it at the risk of their well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So if you return to working in PR, Mark, what might you do differently? And is there anything you miss about working in PR?
Well, it's interesting, Melissa. This is PR right now. So this is PR for Chasing the Sun. So I spend a lot of time, whether it's podcasts or writing for PRSA or elsewhere. But I understand what you're saying. But
in the agency world, I guess, or in-house.
Yeah, in the agency world, I miss working with teams. And that's what I took a lot of pride in. Where Chasing the Sun in part came from is I took a lot of pride in the teams that I was running, the work they were doing, and frankly, the minimal turnover. The people on the teams I was leading didn't leave. And we were able to retain business and grow business. And that was what I would really come in, especially in the later part of my career. I would come in for 6 months at a time, a year at a time. And the executive would say, Mark, we need to stabilize this account. And I would come in and stabilize it. I would build relationships with the clients, but I really wanted to be there for the team. These were smart people who had really good rapport with the client, the media. And that's where I really took my pride in. And that's really what I miss, is coming in and being that person that cares about their well-being. Not that execs don't. There are a lot of great people that I work with in my agency career who really care about their people. And I'm not exclusive to that. That's just where I felt like I was really branding myself. I think if I were to go back, I have a different and evolved vantage point from the client perspective and the challenges that they have, and frankly, how much information is shielded from agencies as far as how decisions are made, how executives are influenced, what are the priorities, and from an agency standpoint, what role can we play? And I think running my own business and working with companies directly, I'm seeing that in a way that, frankly, Melissa, we're kind of shielded from on the agency side unless you have that in-house experience, extensive in-house experience, because we don't see that. We don't experience it. And that's one of the things that I chat with college students and new professionals about, Melissa, is they hear a lot of times, I need to start on the agency side to get a lot of different types of experience and I'll figure it out. And I'll say that makes a lot of sense, but also consider what you're missing by not going in-house and how decisions are made and all the various politics and all the factors that kind of go in. We need that education. I really try to talk to agency folks, the leaders, and giving context as to why decisions are made to help these new professionals grow. Those are the things that I would take back if I were to play a similar role of what I did at Weber Shandwick and Edelman.
I agree. My in-house experience at a nonprofit was very eye-opening to me and still influences what I recommend to nonprofits that consult with me today. And my in-house experience at a corporation and then working large agencies, small, they can all impact you. But I think that having that diversity of experiences will help you have that empathy, as we talked about, and understanding of what's transferable and what's waste. I love that. We should totally do a webinar about cutting the fat in PR.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I like to ask all my guests, Mark, to kind of round out the conversation. What does smart talk mean to you?
Well, smart talk means to me is a conversation and a learning that is going to make an immediate impact on my life, whether that's a practical change into something that I'm going to be implementing to a different way of thinking. And a lot of that comes from a dialogue, a conversation, and not just kind of one-way traffic. And that's what I take a lot of pride in the conversations that I lead and the discussions that I have and the conversations that you have, Melissa, is, am I a better person as a result of this time spent? And so that's how I would define it.
I love it. Yes. A better person from the conversation. Absolutely. So, Mark, you've added a lot of value to this discussion for sure, and you do for our profession. What's the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
Well, Melissa, that means a lot. You can reach me at Mark, M-A-R-K, at chasingthessunpdx.com. My website is chasingthessunpdx.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn at my handle, Mark Mohammadpour. And it's just been an honor working with in-house teams, agency teams on relatable, practical, and actionable approaches to employee well-being. That's everything from designing employee well-being programming to executing it, everything from workshops and keynote speeches and content, all with the intent to make sure that your people feel connected and don't burn out and are set up for success. And I'm proud to take my experience and my learnings in this new phase of my life. It's been an honor.
I love it. Okay, contact Mark. You heard it here. Thank you so much, Mark, for being on the show today.
Thank you, Melissa. My pleasure.
Thanks to our listeners for joining me for today's episode. We love diving deep into communication topics to elevate our industry practice. If you'd like to go deeper, you can work with me as a trainer, consultant, or hire my firm for strategic communication planning or PR strategy services. And in case you missed it, Smart Talk, Public Relations Essentials All Pros Should Know is out. You can buy your copy to get my advice, tips, and tools about all things public relations. Available on Amazon, or get your autographed copy at mvw360.com/book. If you've already got your copy, please leave us a review on Amazon. It would mean the world to us and helps more aspiring pros find the book. And as always, think smart and communicate smart. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Smart Talk series. If you learned something or enjoyed our conversation, share it on social media or send to a friend. To learn more about this and other communication topics, visit mvw360.com. That's mvw360.com.